I'm super excited to be able to share my reflections with you today for the Feast of All the Saints. Today is my favorite liturgical feast day, more than Christmas, as much as Easter. This is one of my favorite days of the year. You can tell if you look behind me, you can see some of the saints that keep an eye on my messy desk for me. And I find this day a great day to think not just about the big name saints, the canonized saints, the saints that we name churches after and ask for prayers from directly and publicly and collectively, but also all the little saints. There's a great book by the feminist theologian Elizabeth Johnson called Friends of God and Prophets. And in that book, she tries to recover what does a feminist rereading of the doctrine of the communion of the saints mean. And she says it means we have to remember not just all the known saints, but all of the unknown holy ones whose holiness is known to God and to the people that they touched. Many of the people who would not be named saints because of their genders or because of their sexualities or because of their state in life, who are all part of the great cloud of witnesses that we celebrate today. Now, why do we celebrate it today? Uh, this is the morning after Halloween. We've all heard, okay, All Hallows Eve precedes the Feast of All the Saints. And why did the church put it here? And many of us have heard its relationship to the Celtic feast day of Samhain, this period where the dead and the living were very close, and how the church appropriated some of that Celtic imagery and practices in order to better spread the gospel. But why did the Celtic people have it here? Well, in the Celtic and Irish worlds, they talk sometimes about thin places, places where the distance between the world of spirits and our world is thinner and more accessible. We can also talk about the way they think about thin times. And in some ways, this is one of those thin times where the world is changing. We're about halfway now between the fall equinox in September and now the winter solstice coming up in December. And as you can tell, if you're paying attention in the northern hemisphere, it's getting dark and it's about to get a lot darker, which is exactly the time to start thinking about saints. And one of the images we often think about saints is about light and darkness, about these holy people who provide light out in our dark world. If the world does not seem dark to you, then you are either not quite paying attention, or maybe that's a nudge that you need to get closer to encounter the people for whom the world is a very dark place right now. Um, in that dark world, as the world seems to be getting darker around us, that's when the light of the saints becomes ever more important, I think. In the book of Daniel, we talk about how the just are going to shine like stars in the sky. We find this imagery all through of how the light of the saints is out there to guide our way, out there to help make the light a little less dark. So what do we do with that today? How do we get in touch with that today? What might we do practically or prayerfully to celebrate this feast, besides getting to church for our holy day of opportunity? One is to think about how this fits with the how we think about holiness and who we think is holy and where we look for that holiness. So I grew up in Rhode Island. I grew up in a pretty suburban slash urban area. I still remember the first day in my 20s that I saw the Milky Way and out in the west, out in Wyoming, and was just astounded by how many stars I could see. And so we might ask, well, how are our spiritual lives or our relationships with the holy ones of God? Where's the light pollution that's keeping us from seeing all of them? So you might be able to easily see Mary and Joseph and Ignatius of Loyola and Teresa of Avila, some of the big bright stars. But where has the light pollution of our spiritual world or our non spiritual world prevented us from seeing some of these smaller stars of holiness? So, who are the people in your life, your ancestors, your physical, biological ancestors, or your spiritual and intellectual ancestors, people who are living lives of true transparency, true light in the light of Christ, that you don't notice as easily or haven't thought of as saints? There's a way in which the light pollution of our world, in which we have lots of big spotlights, big bright yellow ugly traffic lights or street lights saying what people are supposed to be, who's supposed to be important, what a good life is, that get in the way of seeing all of these bright spots, all of these people the holy ones of God, of all genders, who are doing amazing things and living amazing lives and have been through all the centuries. And the second thing then is, well, how are you going to go out there and become the light? Because the one tragedy of life, as was famously said, is not to become a saint. How are you going to not hide your light under a bushel? How are you going to go out there and be the light of Christ? I'm giving a talk next week at Trinity through our adult formation program, adult faith formation, on what I think is the most radical part of the Second Vatican Council, the universal call to holiness, the recognition the Council's teaching has that all of the baptized are called to lives of holiness. That means you and me. That means we're part of not just a little dim light in the middle of the darkness, but we're part of this Milky Way of faith, part of this constellation over the centuries with lots and lots of stars yet to come, that we need to make sure we keep uncovering, keep not blocking, keep not putting under a lampshade, to be the saints, to be the holy pilgrim people of God that God is slowly bringing us into being as. So on today's Feast of All the Saints, go out and celebrate. Get yourself to Mass if you can and are able. But also think about all of in gratitude to God, all of the holy women and men and people of all genders, all of the holy ones of God who model saintliness for us, who provide light in a dark world, and then ask where God is calling you today to be a point of light, to be the star that God has always wanted you to be in our dark and darkening world.